Scott Simon, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Uh, Once in a while, I'm walking around and someone will hear my voice and say, "Oh, are you Chris Kimball?" They don't recognize my face. I assume you get that probably quite a lot.
Oh, yeah. Almost every day, 2 or 3 times a day. Um, the most pleasant recent example of that is, our oldest daughter and her boyfriend and I went to a barbecue festival, and the young man and woman, the couple in charge of the Oscar Mayer Wienermobile.
Oh yeah, I've seen that. Yeah.
I said hello, and they said, "You're not Scott Simon, are you?" And I said, "Yeah, I am Scott Simon." And they were very excited, and against all expectation, they said that while driving the country in the Oscar Mayer Wienermobile, they actually listened to NPR.
That's pretty
Not
cool.
exclusively, but they listened to NPR, and, it was great fun. We got invited on board the Oscar Mayer Wienermobile because I told him that one of the first stories I'd done as a young reporter years ago was on the Oscar Mayer Wienermobile.
Really? Hmm.
I've said, I started my reportorial career, and the young man who was driving the vehicle turns out to have just been a journalism student, a graduate at the University of Missouri, fine journalism school. So he said, "Wow, that's where it can lead." So in any event, it was very nice. Yes, so that happens to me, or people will say something like, "I know you from somewhere, don't I?"
Right. That's right. Yeah.
And my which my family hates, one of my practiced responses is to say, "Yes, adult films." Uh, and,
I wasn't expecting
there
that.
was a woman once on board an airplane who said, "I know you from somewhere, don't I?" And I said, "Yes, adult films." And she won the round by saying, "Yes, now I recognize you. Now I."
Oh, perfect.
Yeah, that was great.
Well, it's like that comment, uh, uh, your mother had. She was asked, "What's it like to be married to the funniest man in Chicago?" And her response was, "I wouldn't know." So
Yeah.
I think that's
We
yeah,
should
that
explain my father was a comedian, so that's why she
yeah, I
explained it. Yeah.
so I was gonna ask you about that. Did you ever get to see him perform as a stand-up comedian or
I was very young. I mean, did I see him perform? Yes. Did I understand it? Not really. Because I was that young, and by the time I was old enough to maybe follow things, it was a long time between jobs because he had a drinking problem, and he died when I was 16, God bless him. But, when I was younger, he was, for example, he was house comic at the Theatrical Grill on, Short Vincent Street in Cleveland. And, he that's where I had dinner every night. And it was great. And they doted on me. I mean, I could have whatever I wanted on the menu, and that's where I discovered snowballs, I think they were called,
uh,
the vanilla ice cream with hot fudge and everything. But, so he was the house comic who would warm up the group for, warm up the room really for a bigger name. And, in any event, I did see him perform. I mean, as I probably don't have to tell you, when he was around us, my mother and I, he could be dour. He could be
right,
very sad. As I've explained to people over the years, people who think that if something I say is remotely funny, they'll say, "Oh, that must be your dad's influence."
right.
And actually it was my mother. My mother was as you just, by quoting her, my mother was actually the very funny one in the family. Um, when you do it for a living, it's rough. You don't give it away, you know?
Right.
And he had a very, I mean, he obviously could be very funny and often was, but he had left to his own devices, he had a very sad view of life.
Years ago, I was in a restaurant in New York, and Robin Williams sat at the table next to mine. Uh, I was there for, like, 2 hours. He didn't say a word the whole time. He just
Really, yeah.
I did not hear the man speak, so I guess that may be true. So, I grew up in the '50s and '60s. There was a fair amount of alcohol going on in my family at the time. As a 12 or 13-year-old, do you understand when someone has an alcohol problem, what's going on, or is that something you only kinda grasp later in life?
I began to understand something was wrong, by the time I guess I was 12 or 13. And, as my mother had explained it to me, over the years, um, part of the reason why she left my father, because she said left to her own devices and her own instincts, she would have stayed with him, but part of the reason why she left him is that, um, she didn't feel that he was up to the responsibility of being a father and that he was blowing up the family with his behavior. And this is something that I wrote about in a memoir that I wrote once. He died when I was 16, and I began to notice around the age of 11, 12, 13 that, he would nurse a glass of something and in his hand and then lie about it, say it was Coke. I noticed that, I would go to bed and he would go to bed. We were sharing one room, in a hotel, the St. Clair's old showbiz hotel in Chicago. And, he would sit by himself and have something to drink and sometimes in the middle of the night. Um, and then I was told by my mother, who was told by some others, that he would show up for auditions and uh, he had a flask that was in his briefcase, and he would always go to the bathroom beforehand to prepare himself. And so all of that was adding up, and my mother's really very loving conclusion, uh, he did not take his life, but he did drink himself to death, and I
Mm,
don't put a lot of distance between the 2. And my mother said she wound up thinking that he took himself out of our lives because he had concluded that he just was not going to get better anytime soon, and that if he stayed with us, it wouldn't be helpful to his son.
huh,
It wouldn't be a good way for his son to grow up and for, his son to see the world, and that, he would take up, a lot of emotional space. And, that's nothing you can prove, but I think I find my mother's conclusions to be, because she did conclude that out of love, not out of anger. That leaving us was the one, in a funny way, last and best gift that he could give his child.
that's a very generous, um, assessment, right, of the
Yeah.
situation, which says something about your mother. You did write a book about your mother in her final time. Um, so do you having, both my parents are long gone, do you do you come away with that with you talk about lessons, right? Do you actually come away with that with lessons, or do those lessons kind of fade over time?
Well, they're lessons that I take, from my mother's life and what my mother said over the years, every day. I think I even had it made into a bookmark when the book came out. I'm wondering, I probably have it somewhere around here. But nostrums that she had in life,
Right.
things like, "There's usually a reason why something is on sale," I think was a good one. "Dress for the job you want, not the one you have." Um, she had a lot of good advice. Write thank you notes.
Yeah, that
So,
was part of my upbringing, yeah.
that's always, I remember once, I was with her a number of years ago. Obviously, it was earlier, and, email had come in, and, I read that, somebody, at NPR had, I think their mother had died. It was on, like, an all-staff bulletin, they would be taking some time off. And I said, "Oh, how sad." And my mother said, "You should write him a note." And I said, "Well, it's a big company, I don't really know him." And my mother said to me, "I bet he knows who you are."
Oh, that was good.
And I wrote him,
Huh.
and I have done that I have done that ever since. My mother said, if you're hesitating, don't do it. Write it. You won't regret it." As to the lessons, any lessons imparted over those last few days, she was a lot of fun. She was a source of laughs until the very end. I mean, at one point when it was quite clear which way things were going, it wasn't entirely when I showed up. I didn't know it was going to be her deathbed. It was the intensive care unit of a hospital in Chicago. But when it became clear that she wasn't going at home and this was the end, she said at one point, "I don't know why this is taking so long. I guess I'm just late for everything."
Very
Which was hilarious, and often she found it difficult to, sleep at night because why go to sleep at night if you realize you've just got a few hours left, but she was getting exhausted and tired. So I said, "Let's listen to music," and we turned on, like, Nat King Cole and Tony Bennett and Frank Sinatra, some of her favorites, and she said, "Maybe we should listen to opera. I always fell asleep when I went to the opera." And, she said something this is something that I'll never forget. She said, "Baby, you should, spend more time talking to people who are in their 80s because they have looked." I'll never forget, she made a gesture with her hand like this. She said, "Because they have looked right across the street at death for a decade, and they
Huh.
know what's
Huh.
really important in life."
She was a wonderful person. I
She,
and a sense of humor.
yeah, she was a wonderful person and a sense of humor. One of my, most delightful NPR staff moments was my mother had said to me, and this, I hardly knew at that point I would write a memoir of our last week together in her life and all that sort of thing. But my mother was married 3 times. She used to love it when I would put each name into her, Patricia Lyon Simon Newman Gelbin. I would introduce her to, "This is my mother, Patricia Lyon." In any event, she said to me at one point, she said, "I know there won't be any attention when I go, but there should be at least a small headline that says" my mother was Irish Catholic. "There should be at least a small headline that says, 'Three Jewish husbands and no guilt.'" And, I put this in a tweet, and, in any event, I was off and I was with my mother, and, when I returned to work at NPR, they had done an obituary about my mother based on what my reporting the tweets and the essay had been, and the headline on it, and often I look past the headline, just said, "Three Jewish husbands and no guilt." So I went down to the digital folks at that point and crying and sobbing and kissing them because I thought that was so thoughtful.
I think in my mother had 3 things she passed on to me, none of which were one of which was useful. The first was always buy antiques, like, instead of okay, fine. The second was even less useful, always wash your fruit. I don't know why she thought that if you're gonna
Well,
give a 15-year-old 3 things, but the last one was this was useful. Never agree to do something in the future if you wouldn't do it tomorrow.
that's very good.
That is actually saved me many, many times from agreeing to do something that's 6 months down the road. I go,
Yeah,
"Well, it's I'm not gonna worry about it." But anyway, that was the sum total of the wisdom passed on from generation to generation. Sounds like your mother had a more humorful and interesting, advice to give you.
she was very funny, and, that's one of the ways she communicated. It was also something that brought her and my father together, as far as that goes. God knows he could make her laugh, almost to the end in a way no one else could. And that was something I observed in the 2 of them. It was an aspect of love, and, although they divorced, and understandably, she could be very angry at him, um, there was also a special and kind of unimpeachable kind of love between the two of them that never quite disappeared despite all the stress. And I think a lot of that was found in their mutual and shared laughter, which was extraordinary.
Let's talk about interviewing for a second. I'm struck, and I love your interviews. Someone said I once heard Scott interviewing a steel worker, and he said, "If you could make pink plastic flamingos and earn as much money as you do making steel, would you make pink plastic flamingos?" And I'm just going like, "Yeah." Like, that's out of left field, but actually gets at something fairly substantial. So, I won't mention names, but there are a lot of interviewers out there, most of which are not very good. And I have some thoughts about what makes a good interview, but you tell me, what makes a good interview?
Well, at first, I should say, I don't know, and I don't think there's any. The current word would be template for it. I tell people the most important thing in an interview is to listen.
Right,
Because if you hear what somebody is saying, you're in a position to follow up and to try and get them to expand on something that they said. Sometimes, clear off the hard surface and get to something
right.
that's more deep below that. So I think listening is important. Getting them to talk is important. I mean, often I think the shorter the question, the better. Now, all of that being said, we have all had interviews where just nothing seemed to work, and,
Yes.
all right, that happened. That's part of the business sometimes. But I think there's something to get people to expand, to be conversational. What's very nice, and it can be very hard to come by, is to try and get people actually thinking as they talk.
Oh,
Uh,
that's an interesting notion.
well, yes, it's funny. Um, I learned a lot about interviewing a number of years ago. I had a novel coming out called Pretty Birds, which was based the siege of Sarajevo and two young teenage women snipers during the siege of Sarajevo. And the woman who was head of public relations at the publishing firm had me take one of those 2-day courses that they then gave authors before they went on publicity tours. And she said, "Look, people here are saying this is nuts. You can't have Scott Simon do that." And she said, "I am asking you to do this not despite what you do, but because of it." And I am so glad that she asked me to do that
Hmm,
because I learned so much. I mean, what you learn is that a lot of the people you interview, which is to say authors, certainly public figures, certainly politicians, um, they're not there to answer your questions. They're
no,
there to get out a message, and they will get that message out regardless of the question. You will almost never hear a politician or public figure go, "Wow, what an interesting question. I've never reflected on that." And as
right.
a matter of fact, it might change deeply held viewpoints that I previously thought I had. And they don't want to give an interesting and nuanced answer. They want
No,
to
right.
they want to sell their book, they want to sell their policy, they want to get a message across. And I'm so glad I took that course because I learned that. And there was just often no way of getting around that, and I understand that. We were talking, but I'm going to try and not get specific, but we were talking about trying to book someone today during our editorial meeting who is asking the administration to do something in the realm of, well, I'll just say foreign policy. Um, and I thought it was important if we could book an interview with her. But I don't think she's going to say anything that would actually um, question administration foreign policy because she's trying to get them to change it. I still think it would be good to interview her because I think there are plenty of things to talk about in that realm. But in any event, I think it sharpened my view of interviewing. And, you know, of course, and did I tell you I interviewed Jennifer Lopez yesterday? I believe I mentioned that, didn't I?
I think you did. That was one of the first things you said to me, yes.
Oh, well, funny. I was gonna try and just, keep it a secret between us, but in any event, she, uh, she was actually very open talking about
Mm,
the whole aspect of being horrendously famous.
mm,
And, she didn't ask anyone to feel sorry for her, but it comes at a cost, and that cost is
mm.
very personal and very direct and strikes within your family. And, I thought she was quite lyrical talking about that. I thought she was quite good.
Well, it seems to me that one of the problems interviewing people is they're asked about 12 questions, the same 12 questions all the time,
Yeah.
and they have their answers.
Yeah.
So you have to get through that as quickly as possible to get onto the fresh material because, as you said, they're so conditioned with their responses that you have to use up that inventory as fast as you can and move on, or start with a question that's completely out of left field that completely throws them off. But you're right, they're on autopilot most of the time, and
Yeah. I
if
mean,
you
and
can get you know
I mean, I sometimes don't mind the inventory. I mean, you catch me, I've been on book tour, and I have a book that I'm trying to sell, and, day after day, night after night, I take some of the same questions, and we dragged one of our daughters along for 2 weeks of the book tour. She had just finished her freshman year of college, and you can imagine, boy, what a great experience this was
yeah.
for her to have to listen to her father. She can complete my punchlines and everything. It's amazing. But,
So
in any
this is the Ulysses S. Cat book, your new book? Yeah.
Ulysses S. Cat and Other Animals I Have Known. So she's heard all the stories, and she's very good-natured about it. But on the other hand, it's not a bad inventory to hear, and I think if you're interviewing somebody about a specific topic or for that matter, certainly a book, I don't know, there's something to be said for practice material. It gets a little, sharper as it goes on, and, we all have those set pieces and, as comedians do. And I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with that. But obviously, you'd also like to get beyond that if you could, or below that, I think might be a better way of, putting it.
But I have to say the fact that your freshman year daughter agreed to go on tour with you for 2 weeks says something about you as a father, 'cause that's usually not an age where someone's gonna go, "Hey, dad, yeah, I'd like to go on tour with you for 2
Uh,
weeks."
we
at
yeah,
a
my
book
my
tour.
my wife and I were a little astonished, but,
Yeah,
very glad to have her along. She had the burrito of her life at the Santa Fe International Literary Festival.
there you
A
go.
a very famed author whom I will not embarrass, at one point leaned over and picked up her fork to eat his own burrito.
A
And
fork? Yeah,
fork, yeah,
yeah.
and maybe that reveals the fact that this is not an American author, but a very well-known author. And in any event, wound up writing the most lovely and lyrical, note of apology to us as a family, saying, "I don't know what I was thinking of." It was a great experience, and, met a lot of good we were at an appearance in Chicago, and I, of course, had introduced, our family, and, I'm signing books, and, an elderly man comes up to her, and he says, "I want you to know your father was the worst geometry student I ever had." And it was my old geometry teacher, Mr. Geis, and she got all excited and brought him over to meet me, and it was a wonderful moment. It was great.
Well, evidently, you had a better career choice, as a result of that. So here's somebody once said, I wanted to get your opinion
Yeah.
on true happiness in life, and he said, "The ultimate moment of happiness is when you have grown children who actually enjoy being with you." And
Oh,
I have 4 grown children, 2 young children,
yeah,
but and I have to I found that to be actually a pretty good definition
yeah,
as these things go. Would you agree with that?
yeah, I like that, I like that.
Yeah.
I might start repeating that. I think,
That's right.
in fact, I can guarantee you I'll start repeating it. I think that's very good.
Yeah.
Um, it's interesting, the best bit of advice I got about being a parent, was from an old boyhood friend of mine named Stewie, and Stewie became a father years before I did. But he said, "What I've learned about being a parent over the years is you can talk yourself blue in the face. In the end, the only thing that counts is your example."
Yeah, well, that's yeah. It's what you do, it's not what you say. Yeah.
Oh boy, yeah, and that I think that really strikes home. So yes, it was, and we 19 and 23 years old, and we enjoy spending time with them. I mean, can I say stuff that embarrasses them all the time? Yeah, that makes them squirm. But I think at this particular point, they've come out of that edge of teendom
Right.
where I can make them squirm, but they also laugh at it, and it becomes a kind of agreed upon burlesque. Uh,
Well, you wouldn't be their dad if you didn't make embarrass them occasionally, because that's
right.
part of your role. It would be horrible if they felt you were just a normal, well-balanced human being, right? It wouldn't be any fun. Um, so you're a huge Cubs fan, obviously. So can I ask about that? Obviously, in 2016, they actually triumphed, but is there something about rooting for a team that has had a very century-long dry spell with constant disappointment? Is there something nourishing in the soul about that process that you
Yes.
really love?
I mean, speaking for myself and speaking in behalf of being a Cubs fan, yes. It was not lost on me, by the way, that recently there was a poll of major league ball players. I think it was in the Athletic, if I'm not mistaken, in which major league ball players were supposed to identify themselves, or were asked not to identify themselves. They could do it anonymously. What franchises were the best to play for? And they said the Dodgers for all the obvious reasons, the Yankees for all the obvious reasons, and then the Cubs.
Hmm.
And of course, the Cubs they're having a good season so far. The White Sox are having a great season so far. But I think I was struck by what a lot of the players said, which was, the team really takes care of their players. There is nothing like being a star on the north side of Chicago. The park itself, Wrigley Field, is just part of the neighborhood, and you become part of
Mm.
uh, to use the overworked word, community, in ways that I think is unusual, particularly in big time sports. And yeah, the longer that 108 years went on with the Cubs not winning a World Series, the more you looked for what amounted to fingernails of opportunity to give you chances to cheer. They had many great players over the years who somehow didn't come together and win a World Series, but I mean, Ernie Banks, Billy Williams, I could go on, Ron Santo. Um, Great players who never got their chance to be in a World Series. And I think it became part of their appeal. It made you notice the lure of the game that came up short of winning a championship. And part of it was just being out in the sun. To this day, most of their games are during the day. Being out in the sun in a neighborhood ballpark on the north side of Chicago. Uh, and victory is not taken for granted. So when it comes, there is great celebration and even sometimes a sense of surprise. And I think that's very healthy. I think that's great. Now it's interesting because, of course, our daughters are at their age. They all have very vivid memories of the Cubs winning the World Series in 2016. And of course, this happened late at night. I was at the 3 games in Chicago, but I was not in Cleveland where they won the 7th game. I was invited, but, didn't didn't work out. And, also I was afraid to jinx the team, but that goes without saying. In any event, I'll never forget waking up our oldest daughter. If she'd gone to bed, there was a 20-minute rain delay. I might be the only one in this conversation that remembers that, but there was a 20-minute
Oh,
rain
boy.
delay, and the Cubs came back and surged ahead in the game. In any event, I woke up our oldest daughter and I said, "Baby, baby, the Cubs won. They won the World Series." And she said, "Oh, I knew they would." And of course, most Cub fans wouldn't know that, but, somebody who was her age at that particular point, well, yeah, of course,
Yeah.
they're Cubs. So, I've had great pleasure being a Cubs fan over the years, and, it's a great, really worldwide fraternity of people at this particular point, and, yeah, it's important to me, damn it, and, now you get the alerts on my phone, I see when the game is beginning, I see when somebody scores. I mean, I think Shohei Ohtani of the Dodgers could well be the greatest player of all time. Uh, but I think the most exciting player in the game right now is, the Cubs center fielder, Pete Crow Armstrong, who's absolutely amazing and such a joy to watch. And, they've got a sounds like, one of the cliches from Bull Durham or Major League, but they got a good group of guys and they give 110%, and I think they could go all the way. Actually, I mean, if the Cubs and White Sox were to ever get into a World Series together, I don't know what I'd do. I really don't. I mean, I would root for the Cubs, don't get me wrong, but I would be beside myself at that prospect.
We can only hope. So when the Knicks won, I had mentioned to you earlier that one of my kids lives in Brooklyn. She was at a bar watching the whole thing. Did I just felt there was some for the first time in years, there was some measure of pure joy in the world.
Yeah.
And I don't I know that sounds, I don't know, silly or simplistic. Do you agree with that? I just thought something was different all of a sudden.
Yes, in part because I'm not 108 years, but what was it, 30 some years, if I'm not mistaken, that the Knicks had been without a championship despite spending all the money that was, not locked down, and even some that was, I think. And it's New York, there's a
Right.
special kind of majesty to that. I mean, I remember what it was like for the Chicago Bulls to win those 6 world championships. And I particularly remember it because I was overseas for some parts of it, and I remember, covering the siege of Sarajevo, and my god, the Bulls were so popular there. It was, "Chicago Bulls, Michael Jordan." And it was that great team of Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, Steve Kerr, who we now know was a coach. Um, Great players, and there was also a feeling that Chicago was somehow like the heart of America, and so it was the heart of America that you could perceive it and touch it through the experience of a, basketball team, and basketball was at that point becoming, and it is even more so today, a very international sport. And, I think when the Knicks won, it was a reminder that all things are possible, and we can use that
Yeah.
every now and then, We, more than every now and then would be nice.
Yeah, I guess it's been a long spell
Did I
since
say 30 year and it's 50 like? Forgive me, Amy Smith, I'm sorry.
um yeah, I don't mean since they won. I mean since this nation has had some moment of unadulterated joy, not something that I can remember in recent memory. Um so is it true? This is like one of those game shows from the 50s. Is it true that you appeared as Mother Ginger in the Nutcracker?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and you wanna just explain who Mother Ginger is for those who
Mother Ginger in the Nutcracker is Mother Ginger comes on stage and she has the bonbon, typically played by children, the bonbon under her skirt, and she has how do I say this nicely? Well, she has a massive cleavage. We have pictures which I'm certainly not going to share, but we have pictures in the family of me, wearing that cleavage, and it was great fun. It was Ballet Austin, and I was invited because I did, an essay on the air in which I was pretty shameless, where I said, well, a parenthetical. I have been looking all of my life. I want to play the stage manager in a production of our town. I mean, I did it in high school, but I mean, and was actually I was sounded out about that just before COVID by a great theater company in this country, but it didn't work out, COVID, all that sort of stuff. I have wanted to play the Sugar Plum Fairy in the Nutcracker. Now look, I know what you're thinking, but I
You
think
yeah,
there's a lot of alternative casting these days, and I think it's time for the Sugar Plum Fairy, I said on the air, to be played by a man with gravitas. You know, somebody who's not a teenager,
right.
not somebody, if I forgive me, uh, great Dutch dancer with a historic eating problem. But, somebody someone of got so I said this on the air, and, within hours, my wife answered the phone at home. They'd been given somebody called NPR and wanted to hear from them, and it was an offer from Ballet Austin, but they said it was to play Mother Ginger. Which, of course, is not the same thing at all, but I was hoping because Mother Ginger does not wind up dancing. You are on a platform and there's the enormous cleavage in front of you, and you have the enormous
Skirt.
hoop skirt
Yeah,
and, that sort of thing. But of course, what I had hoped is that my performance as Mother Ginger,
would
would
lead to
be so yeah,
bigger things. Yeah.
exactly. But it hadn't happened yet, so, a guy can still hope.
You still have time. Yes.
It was great fun, and to work with the ballet dancers, even as Mother Gingers, those great young as I said in the curtain speech, the most kick-ass athletes in all of Texas. They were great, those ballet dancers. I thought it was,
So did you have to show up? I know that in Boston, Boston Ballet, they're big money makers, obviously the Nutcracker. We've had friends whose kids have been in it, and they have to go to every performance over 2 weeks. Did you just do it once, or did you have to keep showing up every night?
no, no, I did it just once, damn it.
There you go.
I would have cleared everything for that, but
Your entire schedule,
yeah,
weekend edition, be damned. That's right.
right, exactly.
You're a big fan of Norman Mailer,
Yeah.
uh, and I mean, uh, did his last book disappoint you? What is it about Norman Mailer you love?
Well, I read a lot of Norman Mailer as I was kind of wrestling with, an adolescent thought of becoming a writer myself. The Naked and the Dead, his
Right.
nonfiction, which, included, his great book about the March on Washington, Armies of the Night, and also Miami and the Siege of Chicago. And, I loved his choice of theme. I loved his kind of windswept writing style. Um, I loved the way he could be hard-nosed about things, I thought was interesting, and unrelenting. Now I have that being said, I don't pick up his books and read them for pleasure now. I tend to read Graham Greene, I read V.S. Naipaul, a lot of Graham Greene, as a matter of fact, and Patchett. But, at that time in my life, Norman Mailer, James Agee, they were very important to me. Agee still, but, and look, I know Mailer's reputation has undergone some reexamination because he was, and I interviewed, um, his widow, who was a wonderful woman who unfortunately, died of cancer shortly after the book came out. Um, and her great book was called A Ticket to the Circus
Hmm.
because she was married to Norman Mailer, and she said, as her mother kept telling her, "You don't get a ticket to the circus and then complain about the clowns." And,
That's a
um,
great line.
so she knew exactly who she was marrying, and he was not husband of the year, but forgive me, uh, she felt they still had, a good life together. And, in any event, I think he left behind, a lot of work that's still worth reading, and he was very important to me as I was trying to struggle with the whole process of writing myself under the circumstances.
So you've written a lot of books. Is is writing a painful process with a great ending, or do you actually enjoy doing it?
I don't have any practical skills. Um,
Except being in the Nutcracker.
right, except being
That's
Mother Ginger, the Nutcracker, yes, thank you very much. As a lot of people know, I don't even have a driver's license, so I can't even drive a car. I have no practical skills whatsoever. Um, well, I can touch type, and I want to thank my high school Laverne Cout, who was a high school typing teacher when they had office skills classes,
I took that as well.
those particular time. And God bless him, Mr. Cout was an active member of the Communist Party. So instead of typing the quick brown fox, sleep upon, we would type things like, the end of the ruling class is coming near, and that he was a great teacher. So I had no practical skills whatsoever. So I take a kind of refuge in writing. Uh, I wouldn't do it. Forgive me. I wouldn't do it day after day, hour after hour, in a sense, year after year if it was painful. But it is rarely pleasant, and you don't. I think you. I never say to my wife, "Boy, I had a good day writing." I might say I had a productive day, or just didn't strike any sparks today, or something like that. But, it's an important part of what I do, and, I like to think it can be something for other people too at the same time. And so that's why I do it. But no, I wouldn't, I wouldn't call it fun. It's nothing that I do for fun, but I do it for life. I read a lot for my job too. We habitually do 2 books a week, often novels, but, in any event, but I also read for fun. I don't write for fun unless you count things like, doggerel I'll write for our family for birthdays or holidays or something like that.
Well, doggerel is by definition fun, or otherwise it wouldn't be called doggerel, probably.
Yeah.
Uh, so when you prepare for an interview, um, w what it how do you do it? I mean, obviously, there's the obvious research, etcetera, and reading notes, but are you looking for a way into an interview with a particular person's you're coming up with a strategy, or you're just informing yourself about possible topics?
Well, it depends. There's often a strategy, or what you think of as a strategy, which is why I say it's important to listen to what they're saying so that you can, you can prepare 15 questions in advance and have to understand that you may get none of them
Right.
for one reason or another, and that's fine. Now, you can't do that all the time. They're obviously public figures that you're interviewing, and you can't ask a senator. You can't decide just to go off in another direction if they've recently cast a vote that's controversial or said something that is controversial or that obviously needs public exploration. But for did I tell you that I interviewed Jennifer Lopez?
No, I don't think you mentioned
Yeah,
that.
okay, well, I interviewed Jennifer Lopez yesterday. She has some new music coming out in July, and of course, it was important to ask her about that. Uh, which is why she wanted to do the interview, but I thought it was also important to ask her about being Jenny from the Block and her career and, where she fits into, American culture now and what it's like to be one of the most famous people in the world. I thought that was something that was, that I think people would like to know about if she was willing to talk about it, and she turned out to be willing to do that. So I read almost whatever I can get my hands on, um, and yeah, I block out questions in advance, but also, I mean, to cite an example, a few years ago, before he went on trial for anything, we interviewed Bill and Camille Cosby, his wonderful wife, about a contribution of art they made to the um, Museum of African American History, Smithsonian Museum of African American Art. And it was at this time there were a lot of public allegations that were being made. And we knew that I had to ask him about that. And we did something that I ordinarily would be opposed to doing for the reason I'll explain. Uh, we went through sort of playing out in advance. Well, what if he said this? What if he said that? What if he said that? And he turned out to have said none of it. I began by saying, Mr. Cosby, the most serious allegations have been made about you. And he began to go, making that like kind of like Jello pudding face,
Right.
which was an indication that he wasn't going to say anything. I think perhaps he thought if he didn't say anything because it was radio, we wouldn't put it on the air. But
Hmm.
I began to talk to to fill in the void, and I said, millions of people love you, Mr. Cosby, and they would like you to make some response to these serious charges. And
Huh.
so I said, okay, Bill and Camille Cosby, thanks so much. And it turned out obviously to be one of the most noteworthy interviews that we did. It got a lot of
Hmm.
attention. It marked the beginning of, let's say, the change in public persona of Bill Cosby. And I got a lot of contrary reaction by that, saying, why are you going, does it give you pleasure to go after an independent, strong minded black man like that? Why are you He hasn't been, put on trial or convicted of anything. Why are you doing that? All of which were good questions. Of course, he was shortly put on trial and convicted, and he's been he's out now. But of course, that's been more procedural than an actual exoneration. And it was an important interview to do, and that's what we do in journalism. But all of which is a way of saying all the questions I had blotted out, none of them
Right.
about. None of them.
Um, I'm interested in this in radio. Weekend edition, if my numbers are correct, is I think the most listened to, or at least within public radio, is extremely successful.
Yeah.
Has maintained its audience when other shows I won't mention have not. Um, and and radio is still a very vibrant part of our culture unexpectedly, probably from if you go back to FDR's day to now, lots of things have changed. Why do you think Weekend Edition has held its numbers and its audience so well over the years? That's a
Well
softball, I know, but I'm actually really interested in your response to this.
well, I try not to think about that too much, but I become aware of the fact, um, unlike very good daily news shows, we tend to be appointment listening. Uh,
Right.
People just don't get up and then turn us on when it becomes convenient or when they get into the car, they often get up to hear us. So this is how they begin the weekend. And I like to think because it's companionable, we become a weekly appointment. It's like
Hmm.
it's like I want to say being with a friend, which is just a little creepy. But in any event, it's I think it brings a group of people together on the air, and I think part of it is the variety. That's what we're able to do. I believe I've told this to you before. We could we could fill 2 hours every week on the air with stories that were urgent and sharp and important, um, and people would stop listening. I think what you also have to have in there, if you're going to have a relationship with listeners, with an audience of any size, and God bless we do, millions, I think it has to be a relationship in all ways. I think you have to take the risk of being funny. I think you have to take the risk of sometimes being nonsensical. I think some things are just for enjoyment. I think, um, and then by the time you have something that is utterly important and urgent to say, people will be with you.
Hmm.
But I think you also need to give them a sense of relief and to talk to all sides of what the human experience human experience is. And look, we just don't do sports as news. We have a sports section, and I get a little carried away sometimes. I call that my sports doofus voice.
Hmm.
And I'm clear-eyed about, for example, the Cubs and the Bears and the Bulls and all that sort of thing, but in any event, I give team chants and Milwaukee Bucks in the playoffs, "Fear the deer," and, LeBron has great years with the Cleveland, Cleveland rocks," depending on the World Cup, because my wife is French, "Allez le bleu!"
Le
Uh,
bleu, yeah.
in any event, I people have told me over the years, "I don't like sports, but I like your sports segment." And it's not because it's important, although we have 2 fine journalists between Michelle Steer and Howard Bryant who talk to us about sports. But I think it also puts a little zip into our lives, a little step, even when the sports news can be serious. And that's a regular feature we have. I just like to think we have a relationship with our listeners, and I think people do on the weekend. It's something that they identify with. We can do that, I think, first and last because the daily shows, uh, are so very accomplished at delivering the news. Uh,
But they're unfortunately stuck much more with headlines on a daily
yeah,
basis than you are, so you have a little bit more
yes,
room to play, right?
absolutely, and we have to not take that for granted. We have to make it worth, everybody's while and their experience listening.
Well, you just turned it around on me because we were talking earlier about, celebrities, whatever, rarely get a question and go, "Oh, yeah, that's a really I'm gonna rethink my whole position." But you just said something that I've never thought of or considered, which is if you're gonna have a relationship with a listener, you have to show all sides of your personality and do serious and do funny and do silly, and you can't get trapped by being just
Yeah,
one part of who you are. I think that's really interesting. Adoption. So this is one of my favorite quotes from you. Our baby had opened new chambers in our hearts, and we realized our daughter hated us. I just love that.
this is a book I
Glad
wrote
talking about that.
This is a book I wrote about adoption, not just our adoption, but several adoption stories called "Baby, We Were Meant for Each Other." And our children are much younger. I don't know if you have the book in front of you there, but, uh,
And no, I have looked at it though. Yes.
the most beautiful picture in the world of my beautiful wife and our oldest daughter then when she was an infant and had been put into our arms. Um, Elise, our oldest daughter, had been in, an orphanage. She had obviously, she missed being, missed the people who were in the orphanage, missed the people who were taking care of her. She was in new surroundings when she was in our hotel room in a skyscraper in Guangzhou. And, she was, when she was young, she was an infant. She was 11 months old. She was crying, 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 and nothing. I was pulling out all the stops. I was singing to her. My wife and I were singing to her, cooing her, and she was just, and that's when I uttered to my wife, "Realize our daughter hates us." But I
She
think
got over it.
yeah, she got over it, yeah. At least we gave her new reasons to, new reasons to, change or whatever measure she was making of us. But adoption does open new chambers in your heart, and I try not to get fussy about the language that people use because I think that's one of the things that is in our current society is distancing people from each other. But all of that being said, I don't like it when someone says, adopted daughter, or adopted son. It's daughter.
Right.
I mean, if you have to go into the circumstances for one good reason or another, that can follow. But it certainly doesn't feel that way, and really never has. Um, our daughters were their parents.
You also have this great line about parenthood. Um, I've have 6 kids, and I guess I earned a right to have an opinion about it, but yours is better. You say, "Parenthood is shit, snot, slime, fear, tears, spit, and spills." I love that. And then you say, "It's as intense as combat," which is to say, hours of tedium relieved by moments of alarm and flashes of joy to
Yeah.
remind you that you're alive. I think that is the best 2 sentences ever to describe parenthood. I think you really, and it's also extremely well written, but it's well done.
Well, I have colleagues who have younger children at this particular point, and I understand. They will come in after a rough night with children keeping them up or early in the morning or just things you go through. And I say, I know you're going to find this insufferable, but treasure every minute.
Oh, that that really goes over well. Yeah.
I re But, it's very funny. A few years ago, my wife and I were having dinner with a Chicago alderman, which was the term then, now it's alder, and, she represented a North Side ward. I was working on a novel called Windy City that's set in the Chicago City Council, and she was very expansive talking about the duties that she had as an alderman, and, I made note of that, and I found it, interesting and useful, the way she was constantly on call. There'd be a snowstorm and the cell phone would begin to ring, "When are you gonna plow my driveway?" and all that sort of thing. And I liked her very much. I thought she was a very conscientious public servant. But the thing she said that really stayed with me, our daughters were young then, and her children were grown, and she said, "Look, I have a great relationship with my kids. They're great, but I would give 10 years of my life to have them back when they were, like, 3 or 4,
Hmm.
just for a few minutes." Oh my god. That just really, 'cause that's about the ages of our daughters at that particular point, and that just really pierced me into the heart. And what happens, of course, as they grow older and you grow older, is you look at them and you realize that in the case of our daughters, more or less grown up now, but you also never lose sight of them when they were younger, when they were
Mhm.
infants, when they needed you for everything. And, they never stopped being a child that way.
Right.
And your view of them is conditioned to be of all ages at once. Yes, you recognize you might have a daughter who's 23, but every time I look at her, she's also 4 or 5. And I just think that's a very human view. That's how we see each other.
Well, I'll just leave you with one last thought. What my second oldest daughter years ago took me out to lunch, and I realized halfway through she was giving me advice, and then I realized it was good advice.
Oh,
And I
that's
and that's the moment, that is the parental moment. That's the Rubicon where
yeah.
you go, "We're in a different country now," right?
Oh my god, good advice. Oh my god, how embarrassing.
It was, yeah, it was revelatory, let me put it that way, yeah.
Well, I notice things now, like, 'cause our oldest daughter has been doing a lot of cooking for the family, and she uses phrases now like, It's a little the garlic here is a little too flavor forward. Go ahead.
Uh-oh. No, thanks. Scott, it's been,
Probably learned it from you.
yeah, blame me. Go ahead, blame me. Scott, it's been, this has really been a pleasure.
Thank
So,
you, thank you.
yeah, I really enjoy your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you,
All right.
Christopher.
Take care.
Take care.
Bye.